How are we doing today, boys and girls? It's Iron Wings 3187 coming at you with another episode of Iron Wings Reviews. Today I decided I was going to go ahead and go back to my roots. It's been a while since I've done a knife review. And in this, I decided I was going to kind of do a themed episode today. What I decided I wanted to discuss or review was, basically the other night I was sitting here and thinking about all the money I wasted on knives when I was back in the U.S. Army. I was one of those dumb privates who had more money than he knew what to do with. At least at that time I thought it was, because I didn't have a whole lot of bills to pay. And so, soon as payday hit, I was the kind of guy you could probably find hitting up the PX or the AFI shop, the clothing shop, on Fort Campbell, and I would inevitably be buying some stupid knife or some stupid product. More often than not, they were M-Tex, Z-Hunter brand, these cheap Chinese-made generic knives that didn't even say what steel they were. They were just made in China and cheap, crappy quality steel. So what I did is I would go to these shop at the PX and I'd buy these cheap M-Tech or Zombie Hunter knives that I'd use a couple of times and either give away or they'd break or I'd throw them away, or just any number of stupid things that I basically would waste money buying these things. And if I had to guess, I'd probably say I spent $5,000-$6,000 on stupid like garbage quality knives. And this, while remembering this and thinking over this, I kind of asked myself, if I was put back into the Army, like if I was traveled back in time with the current memory and thoughts that I have right now, what knife would I want in the Army instead of all those cheap, crappy knives? What would I buy instead of those just so I can use them, you know? Something that is more reliable now that I know you get quality instead of quantity. So, what I decided to do is I brought out every Molle compatible knife that I own at this time. Not a lot, but still. Or at least any knife, fixed blade or otherwise, that I own that you could get something that is Molle adaptable. So, what I'm going to go ahead and do is let's go ahead and get started with probably the default. Anyone who has been in the U.S. Army will be able to recognize that sound alone. This is the Gerber M600, I believe it's called, something like that. And it is the default go-to multi-tool for anyone in the United States military service. That is because you can deploy the pliers one-handed, open it up, get into whatever tool you need, close it up, and then, once again, one-handed, close the pliers, locking your tool and the multi-tool closed. And this is just kind of the go-to for the U.S. military because it is cheap. I think when I was in the Army, you could find these at the shop at or the PX for, I think, $40 to $60, sorry. And this isn't the actual one I used in the U.S. military. I was one of the guys, I never owned one of these, I never bought it. What I owned was a Leatherman, I can't even remember the model. Oh no, it was a Gerber. I owned a Gerber multi-tool that was like fold out and it had like the paraframe style. This is on here because this comes default with a Molle compatible pocket, but I don't really view it as being fair to compare against the rest of these because this is just kind of something that every soldier should have on them because the military version has the tool needed to adjust your front and rear sights for your M16 and M4 rifles. So, with that being said, this is something that is a go-to. Every soldier should have this, and I really do think that you need this. But I'm not going to include it on this list as I eliminate these one by one. Instead, I think this is just kind of the control, something that every soldier is probably going to have, or at least something similar to this. Next up, we're going to talk about is this. This is my CRKT Spew. I bought this at my local Walmart for $20 when it was on sale, and it comes with a Molle compatible Kydex sheath. CRKT does have these kind of funky, and I like this one because I kind of Ranger carry or Scout carry this. I Scout carry this on my belt when I'm out and about just because this is kind of my go-to everyday carry knife for fixed blades. small enough that you can use it, and it's fixed blade tang, so it's strong enough for our day-to-day use, but it's not large enough to really be intimidating to people. They do sell at CRKT different models of clips that are Molle compatible. For 20 bucks, I think this is actually a really good knife for like a driver or a, what would you call it? A combat engineer. Someone like that, this spew would actually be pretty good because you can strap it up here to your vest or your assault pack strap. And if you have it strapped up there and you're out on a deployment, let's say you get hit by an IED or you drive off the road for some reason, you wreck your truck, you can use this, having it up here as just a good, with the straight edge on the knife blade, you can use this as just a good seatbelt cutter. Unfortunately, I'm going to probably eliminate it right off the bat because it's very small, the tip is very delicate, the blade itself is very thin, so this is not something that I would use as a primary knife while in the U.S. Army. This would be like a backup tool, something that if I needed to fight my way out of a vehicle in terms of like cutting myself out, breaking the window or something, or finding some way to get out, I'd probably have that just so I could cut my seatbelt really quick. Next up would be this Gerber Prodigy, I think is what it's called. This is the Walmart version of the Gerber Strong Arm, which is Gerber's attempt to come up with a new combat knife for the U.S. Army. It comes with a Molle-compatible sheath from the factory made of Kydex and nylon, and it is a very thick-stocked knife with injection-molded plastic grips, rubber also. It's full tang, well, it's a hidden full tang, and for this was $40 at Walmart, sorry. It's not a bad knife, but it's my least favorite on this table. At least in terms of, like, overall. There's least favorites of... I'll go into this later. The reason why this is my least favorite is just because of Gerber's cutting edge. The blade itself, the cutting portion of the blade is too thick. And the thing is, as for a combat knife, I am comparing it against the Gerber here. And in my mind, a good combat knife is going to have a multitude of functions. You're going to be able to cut a seatbelt with it, pry open an ammo crate, any number of tasks you might need to do. But with this, it's not going to cut very well because the blade is just so thick and it acts more like a chisel than it does a knife. And I understand that's kind of a give and take. The spine has to be thick if it's going to be super durable. But there are other knives on this table you see where the spine's thick, but it can still cut well because it's designed a lot better. And on top of that, when I first got this knife, the reason why you see this thing is so worn, it's not only because it's my workshop knife, something that I'm not afraid to beat up, but because when I got this, Gerber basically left this thing with like a serrated edge. Mine, this is a complete smooth edge, but the reason it's serrated is because there were so many burrs left on the blade because their sharpening process has gotten so bad. I carried a Gerber drop point Hunter, I think is what it was called. One of those Gerber knives with the gator skin and like a teardrop-shaped blade, teardrop-shaped blade. And when I carried that in the U.S. Army, it was actually a fairly good knife. It was razor sharp, but that was a knife I got from a friend, and I think it was made in like 2008. Anything made since like 2013, 2014 from Gerber, the edge quality has just gone downhill so much. It's just ridiculously bad. So I can't justify this as being the one knife that any soldier can have. And it only edges out the spew a little bit because not only is it able to cut seatbelts, but it has a built-in glass breaker. So, I mean, I don't know if the Strong Arm or the LMF2, I think is what it might be called, if the actual like $200 or $150 Gerber knives are higher quality than this or better, but to me, this is what most U.S. soldiers are going to get. They're not going to go out and spend $150 on a Gerber knife and carry that with them. They're going to go to Walmart and find this and be like, oh, that'll work. So that's probably going to be the bottom of my list. And keep in mind, none of these, this is not going to be a guarantee that you're going to be able to carry one of these knives in the Army, because from what I understand, a lot of the gear you can carry on a day-to-day basis is up to commander discretion. Some commanders won't have an issue with you carrying a fixed blade as long as it's, hidden away. For example, the Gerber drop point hunter, whatever it was, I can't remember, that I mentioned earlier, I was not allowed to carry that after about a week because my captain came up, spotted a little bit of half-inch of the sheath hanging out from under my ACU jacket and said that breaks the dress code for the U.S. Army. Keep in mind, at that point, I was like bending over and signing paperwork or something, so my ACU jacket had rode up. But a lot of that kind of stuff, it's up to the commander discretion, and our commander just didn't like soldiers carrying fixed blade knives. He had no issue with like a Gerber or a pocket knife, but fixed blades were pretty much out of the question. He would always find some way to keep you from carrying them. After that, what we would probably discuss next is... yeah, it would probably be this. This is my Buck Intrepid. This was, for viewers of the channel, you would know that this is the first knife I ever owned, and this one is kind of an odd duck, because on one hand, I would really recommend this because the grip feels very comfortable. It's that really well-known Buck 420HC, which the Gerber is 420HC, but Buck has some mystical unicorn blood process where they managed to get this a lot harder than any other company that uses that steel. It's a good blade profile, a little bit more narrow than the Gerber, but it also suffers from a little bit thinner of a spine. However, it makes up for it by using a Tonto blade, which uses strategic, like stamping or grinding, to reinforce certain parts of the blade to keep them from snapping off. It also has a much smaller tip that can be sharp, but because it's so short, has a much less chance of actually snapping off. And this is kind of a complicated one because while I would recommend it, because it does also come with the Molle compatible sheath straight from the factory, it's much better in my opinion than the Gerber because it can cut. It has the similar, it's not as prominent of a glass breaker here on the pommel, but you can still turn it around and whack it against a car window and get it broken out. The reason I can't really fully recommend this is just because it is currently a discontinued knife, which means it shot up from like the $80 it used to be when I was in the Army to now selling for $120 to $150. So as much as I love this knife and it's nostalgic for me because it was my first fixed blade and I did carry it for a while, I honestly just can't recommend it because of being discontinued and it just being so expensive. Next up is the K-bar. So this is my U.S. Army stamped K-bar, which is basically just a regular K-bar but with Army instead of the Marine stamped in it. And this one I'm probably also going to just take off this list because it's getting a little long in the tooth. And what I mean by that is it is a rat tang knife, or a stick tang you would call it. It's a lower quality steel. It's still good quality, but it's not the highest. And there's a lot of videos of these things not really standing up to the extreme wear and tear you would expect a U.S. Army or a combat knife of modern times to stand up to. There's videos of guys basically just, these aren't meant to be thrown at targets, but guys are throwing these at like ballistic gel dummies, and the handle just bends at an almost 90-degree angle. So, as much as I love these, because of the history, because of the heritage, I'm also probably going to take it off the list because for the price you're paying, you're not getting a super high quality knife in terms of the blade, steel, construction, any of that kind of stuff. You're getting a good quality blade, don't get me wrong, but it's gotten a little long in the tooth, and K-Bar is taking steps to modernize production, but this is the one that I have and had. And while you can get Molle adaptation kits for this specific knife, so you can actually attach it to Molle gear, I can't justify this actually making the cut when it comes to combat knives that I would recommend carrying. Just because, to me, it is a good knife, but it's not worth the money you spend. And there are better knives that are better constructed nowadays. And the only edge this really does have is you go anywhere. You go to the Middle East, Asia, Europe, you go anywhere in the world, dressed in a combat uniform with one of these hanging off of your gear, they're going to recognize you as American, because this is the go-to American combat knife, and it still is for the U.S. Marines, but I'm not a Marine, I was a soldier. You know. So, that leaves these 4 choices. And technically, this one is a wild card, so we'll go ahead and discuss this next. This is my SOG Seal Pup. This cost me, I think it was $80 or $90 on Amazon. It is a AUS 8 stainless steel blade, and it comes partially serrated. This is supposed to be a very good steel for the knife. I'm not sure, because this is something that I keep in my truck for emergency purposes. And while it doesn't technically out-edge the Gerber or the Buck, because it doesn't have a glass breaker, the higher quality steel, the polymer molded, injection molded handle, and it being a hidden full tang, I believe, plus the fact that the knife itself is actually very well designed. The edge gives you a nice belly for cutting and slashing, while giving you serrations, which, as a former air assault soldier, serrations are kind of a good thing to have, because you're constantly dealing with things like paracord, ratchet straps, duct tape, that sort of thing. And that's not why this Seal Pup is a wild card. No, that is the sheath itself being Molle compatible and able to fit a SOG Tomcat. This was one of the first folding knives that I owned while in the Army that actually locked. Most of the knives I owned before this were either frame locks or they were slip joints. This was I think they call it an axis lock or a swing lock, something like that. And it's actually a very durable knife. It has rubberized G10 handles and VG10 steel for the blade. It's very strong, very competently made, and razor sharp when you get it. The point's very good, and it's very good thick blade stock. So, would I recommend this to a soldier starting out, this combination? Yes, because not only do you have a fixed blade that has good quality steel for the blade, partial serrations, a decent quality thickness. The only downside I can see to this knife is, 1, no glass breaker, which means you're not going to be able to really break out of anything. But given the fact that in military vehicles you either have really freaking thick windows, like on an up-armored Humvee, or some Humvees don't even really have windows, they just have vinyl that you can unzip. That's not as big of a deal to me, a deal breaker, but what really does kind of keep this from being my top recommendation is just how thin that blade profile is. That blade, I would be afraid of sticking into a ammo crate and prying up, because this blade would probably snap off right at about this upswell of the back, the spine of the blade. But that's also why I included as the wild card, including the SOG Tomcat in here, because the SOG Tomcat does come with a Molle compatible sheath, but it has a much thicker spine, and that access lock basically turns this into an almost pseudo fixed blade. So you could theoretically open this up, cram it into a ammo crate, and crank up on it, and that would work without really snapping the blade. I wouldn't recommend it frequently, but this combination, I think, if any soldier had both of these knives together, it would make a very good combination for a combat blade. And then, unfortunately, you got the fact that the frickin' sheath, give me 1 second here, I'm surrounded by knives, and yet I have a loose string of nylon. That's the one downside to this knife also, beyond the glass breaker and the thickness, is the sheath isn't designed super well. They have this Velcro latch here for the strap, but they also have a snap on it. So why do we need this Velcro section right here? It makes no sense to me, but that's going to go on the recommended, and we'll eliminate it along with these 3. Well, we'll compare it with these 3. We'll get down to the top 3, and then I'll compare and see which one I think would be the best overall. So first off is the CRKT Clever Girl. And this one I'm starting out with for this section because this is probably the least expensive while still being produced. This is designed by Austin McGlawn, and people who are longtime viewers of my channel will know the history behind this particular knife. I won't go into it here, but there's a video on my channel called Storytime with Iron Wings where I kind of review this knife. And It's made out of SK. All three of these CRKTs are SK5 steel, which is okay. It's kind of the lower end of the carbon steel knife, and that's because Austin McGlon designs these for combat. He's designing them for a soldier that's not going to have a full range of whetstones and belt grinders and sharpeners to re-edge this knife. He's designing it for something that some guy's out in the field, he has a diamond rod in his back pocket or something, so you're going to be able to touch this up pretty easily. I think this cost me $60, $70 in a sporting goods store that had it on sale, but it usually sells, from what I understand, like $90 to $99 on Amazon. This is probably my least favorite of Austin's designs. I haven't really reviewed any of his other designs in depth, but the reason why this is my least favorite, and this is something I haven't really covered yet to this point, is this handle is way too long for my hand, and I get it. Maybe you have gorilla hands, or, you know, because he designs this for combat, it could be he designed it for you to use it while wearing your, like, Kevlar and goatskin leather gloves that the Army issues you with, like, the leather over your knuckles, or with your actual leather work gloves. There's any number of reasons why this handle could be so long, but to me this is the least utilitarian or versatile of Austin's knives. This is actually very much almost like a combat or a self-defense knife, and there's nothing wrong with that, but for the Army I would want something with a little more use, and I don't see this, like this long sweeping design is good for slashing, maybe for cutting, but I think this is more of a slashing design, and there is a difference between slashing and cutting. Slashing, you're doing a dragging motion, and it's a long sweeping motion, whereas cutting, you can basically just sit here, get some 550 cord, wrap it around the blade, and just pull, and it'll cut. So another issue is the tip being so fine, it's good for sticking. But again, this is something where I wouldn't exactly trust sticking this into an MRE crate, or not an MRE crate, a ammo crate, and just wrenching up to crack it open. You know, that's not something that I'd really trust this blade with. It does still have that glass breaker on the pommel. So, as good as a knife as it is, it's my least favorite of his design because to me it is just a combat knife. That's pretty much it. There's not a lot else to it. Then we have next up, because this is still in production, which is why, the Clever Girl Kukri. Now, this I would really, really recommend. I really do like this knife because it has a good amount of weight, and with the heft it has and the thickness of the stock, not only does it have this nice belly right here for chopping where you can just get in and hack away at brush, you have this nice sweeping belly, almost like, it is based on a kukri, but it more reminds me of, I don't want to say the Kopesh, because I think that was the Egyptian sword, but it was Alexander the Great's sword, where it has this similar blade design, and I like that because you can also use it for cutting and slashing. Not only that, but it has a really nice choil here that allows you to choke up and just use it for fine cutting or chopping. The handle has the same issue as the Clever Girl because it is basically the exact same handle design. And I really do think that was Austin McGlon's biggest mistake when designing this blade, is he took the Clever Girl instead of the Rakkusan's handle design. And you'll see why I say that in a bit. But otherwise, I think this is going to have to go alongside the SOG Seal Pup because this is probably one of my favorite knives that I currently own, just because it is so versatile. You've got a nice point that you can use for poking. You can get it into like an ammo crate and really wedge that sucker open because of how thick that blade stock is. And it has a really good edge for both fine work and chopping. This is a excellent, and I really do emphasize excellent, combat knife. Not only because it's probably going to earn you a lot of respect if you carry this hefty sucker around Afghanistan, but the fact that it has so many different uses you can get out of it. The only real downside that I can see is the fact that the sheath is not Molle compatible. I'm sure that you can contact someone or find someone that can make you a Kydex sheath for this thing that is Molle compatible, but as it sits right now, you would probably have to go to CRKT and find some way to actually convert this to Molle compatible. And then finally, my last knife here, The final knife we're going to discuss today is my CRKT Rakkasan. Now, I am a little biased here, but not because it's my unit's old name, not because it's designed by Austin, any of the other stuff. I just really like the design of this blade, and I really do think this is one of the ultimate knives when it comes to being designed for both combat and just as a fixed blade on a whole. You have a really nice recurve blade, and what that recurve blade means is you have a good chopping action here at the inlet of the belly. You have a really nice upsweeped curve, which allows you to get a good slashing motion. The entire design gives you a really good geometry, I would say, for a cut instead of just a slash. So you can sit there and pull this and it'll cut really well. Plus you've got a reinforced tip that is not only good for poking, but again, the thickness of the blade stock is actually really good for anything you might need. Like I said, I've been coming up with the example of like prying open ammo crates, and that's because more often than not, a lot of the guys that I've talked to and in my own experience in the Army don't bring a freaking crowbar with them for prying open ammo crates. So you'll see guys sticking like buck 110s into an ammo crate and just prying that sucker open. So you can do that with this without really worrying about snapping the tip, because you have this almost pseudo clip point edge, the false edge back here, that's reinforcing it. Your handle is, again, G10, and all these are SK5, but this is a fixed full tang, and the handles are G10, I believe, and they are really non-stick. Plus, you've got, as odd as it looks, all these little divots are really good for like placing your fingers or your thumb in, no matter which way you hold it. So it's just a really comfortable edge. You can get up onto the actual blade and use it for carving or whittling. Not perfectly, but you can just sit there and cut away at a stick to pass time. You have this almost pseudo, I don't want to call it a guard, but you have this swell at the top of the handle to keep your hand from slipping up onto the blade. And on the base, you have this swell at the pommel, which also helps you from slipping and letting the knife go from your hand. The sheath itself is very good quality. It's Kydex, of course, but it also does not come with a Molle compatible option default. Instead, it comes with this weird clip system that CRKT kind of insists on having. So, would I recommend this? Yes, absolutely. I think this is an absolutely fantastic knife design. I think it's wonderful for any kind of use. And on top of that, while it doesn't have a for sure glass breaker, the fact that this thing's fixed tang and has a little bit of that steel sticking out, you can still go after a window and probably break it. So with that, we have gotten down to our final 3 contestants. And we're going to go through and see which one of these 3 I would recommend most. And right off the bat, I would probably have to eliminate the SOG because it's kind of unfair, and I do understand that. I wanted to add a wild card in, but yeah, the SOG, the reason it's getting eliminated, while it does come default with a Molle compatible sheath, and the blade itself is actually probably a more durable in terms of edge retention, the blade itself is pretty thin, and the sheath itself is not the best quality, or at least the best design. My sticking point is still this stupid Velcro bit on the retention strap. Why do we need that Velcro when you already have a metal button snap? When combined with the Tomcat here, it's a good combination, but realistically, this knife already costs $80 to $100, depending on where you get it. And the Tomcat itself, 3.0, is again another potential $80. So you're looking at a $200 combination to do basically the same thing these two can do. And I mean, granted, you are doubling your edge retention with both of those knives included, but you're also almost doubling your weight. So I don't know, this just doesn't seem as versatile to me as either one of these two. Now, the question is, which one of these do I think is going to take home the gold? I've already ranted about how fantastic the Rakkasan is. I love this design, I love the blade. I think it's a nice compact design compared to the Kukri. And I think this is going to be a bit more realistic for a soldier to be carrying on their assault pack compared to this. This is something that, like, you would... The reason why I don't think this is Molle compatible is the width of that belt, like the belt loop, I expect that CRKT kind of planned for soldiers to carry this on their web belt, the one that you use for your pants. But even then, this thing is going to weigh like a fucking brick on your hip. So, it's kind of a hard call to make because this one is just so versatile. You've got the weight for chopping, the blade geometry for cutting, and for slashing. You've got a glass breaker. There's all sorts of things you can do with this knife. But at the same time, like I said, that weight is going to eventually just drag you down. And that's the thing is, I was in the 101st Airborne, and one of the first things you learn when you get to the 101st is being selective about your gear. And the reason for that is from a long-standing issue with World War II, where the 101st Airborne was deployed for the first time during D-Day with leg bags, and soldiers just basically got greedy and crammed whatever they could fucking think of into these leg bags and wound up basically attaching an extra 200 pounds of gear to their leg. So you're very selective about what gear you use as the 101st Airborne. So the weight, the versatility this provides, I would probably say this would take the edge. But at the same time, due to commander discretion, this is going to be a lot more obvious and a lot harder to pull off. So it's kind of up in the air at this time. Not even up at this time. I'm going to have to give it to the Rakkusan at this point. I have to give it to the Rakkusan because it has a lot of the same positives that the Kukri does. But it's much smaller in profile. It's not as heavy. And it can be attached to your assault pack or your vest and not really weigh it down and drag it down like that Kukri could. So, all in all, I'm sure it's probably not a surprise to some of my longtime viewers, but to be honest and fair, this would probably be second place if the Buck Intrepid was still in production, because this knife is absolutely fantastic. I carried this thing for years while in the U.S. Army. It was durable, it was rugged, it's very rudimentary, but that's a good thing. It still kind of comes with the glass breaker here at the pommel. So if this was still in production, I would recommend this for any beginning soldier, but at this point it's not, and anything comparable, mainly the Buck Compatriot, I think is what it's called, or the Compadre, is like double in cost to what this thing used to be. So this cost, unfortunately, this is also discontinued, but it's not. The thing is, the price for this hasn't shot through the roof. You can usually get these for about $125 on the CRKT Underground. If they are in new condition, $150. So this is the knife I would recommend for any soldier that is about to either go into a combat situation or wants something for a day-to-day carry in his assault pack. With that out of the way, I hope you guys have enjoyed the content and my discussion and just my kind of rambling thoughts on these things. It's good to be back, and I really do appreciate you watching. Hit the like, subscribe buttons down below, all that jazz. Otherwise, this has been Iron Wings 3187, and I really do appreciate you guys for watching. Happy Labor Day.